Welcome back to the deep dive. When we think about modern technology, global finance, we often hear these really grand, ambitious goals, right? Organizing all information, instant transactions, automating everything.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like this smooth, inevitable path towards efficiency, maybe even a bit utopian.
Exactly. But underneath that shiny surface, the sources we've been digging into paint a much messier picture. These systems, whether it's super fast finance or incredibly powerful AI, they're operating in this really complex, high-stakes world.
That's right. We're seeing huge global tensions, some really stark ethical trade-offs bubbling up. The promise is there, but the reality is complicated.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to unpack the core tensions that are really shaping the 21st century economy. We're looking at three big interconnected areas.
Okay.
First, this intense global data race, basically Silicon Valley versus China's tech giants. Second, the economic fallout, this thing called the Great Decoupling, all about AI and how it's hitting the labor market.
And the third piece.
And third, we're looking at corporate culture, integrity, leadership styles, and this relentless drive for speed and, wealth.
Right. And the sort of common thread tying all this together is how chasing these seemingly better systems, faster finance, smarter AI, market dominance, often leads to these unexpected, sometimes pretty significant societal consequences.
It really makes you ask, what's the actual price we're paying for all this speed and scale?
That's the question, isn't it?
Okay, let's kick off with that digital battleground. For a long time, the attitude in Silicon Valley towards Chinese tech was, a bit dismissive, wasn't it?
Oh, completely. There was this pervasive feeling of superiority. They really saw Chinese efforts as just copycat work, kind of hollow.
Like those stories about joke gifts?
Exactly. Our sources mentioned that specifically. Tech folks visiting China would bring back these little non-functional mini iPhones. It was a gag. But to them, it symbolized Chinese tech. Looked similar on the outside, but lacked that core innovation, that sort of mysterious magic they felt defined American tech. Style over substance, basically.
And wow, what a massive strategic misread that turned out to be. While they were sort of chuckling about copies, China was building this incredible data ecosystem.
And not just quantity, though. The scale itself is just mind-boggling. China has way more internet users than the US and all of Europe put together. That's the baseline.
But it's the quality of the data, right? That's the real differentiator.
Precisely. It's the nature of the data they were collecting, fundamentally different from what the big US players were focusing on at the time.
Okay, so let's break that down. US tech platforms, Google, Facebook, YouTube. They got really good at understanding our online lives.
They mastered that digital reflection. Their data was heavily focused on online behavior, what you searched for, photos you uploaded, videos you watched, posts you liked. They understood your digital persona, your consumption habits online.
But the Chinese ecosystem went further. It wasn't just online clicks. It was grounded in the physical world.
That's the key difference. Think about apps like Alipay and WeChat. They weren't just for messaging or searching. They were integrated into daily life. Mobile payments were everywhere.
So the data they gathered was about real-world actions.
Exactly. What physical stuff people bought, when and where they bought it, which restaurants they ate at, appointments for haircuts or makeovers, the specific bus or subway routes they took. It's like a digital map of actual physical movement and commerce.
And that has massive implications now that AI is moving beyond just optimizing ads online and starting to, as the sources say, electrify core industries.
Huge implications, because deep learning algorithms, they can only optimize what they can see in the data.
Right.
If Chinese AI is being fed data that links online activity with physical transactions and movement, it gets, many more eyes into how daily life actually works.
Sounds like giving the AI a direct window into the functioning of society itself.
In a way, yes. Think about logistics, supply chains, training autonomous vehicles in busy cities, planning smart cities, optimizing factory floors. Search history alone doesn't give you much leverage there.
But data on where goods are moving, where people are traveling.
That allows algorithms to predict bottlenecks, optimize delivery routes, manage traffic flow in ways that purely online data just can't match. It gives them a significant head start in those real-world applications.
And this deep integration into physical commerce needed a different kind of financial plumbing too, right? Like those micropayments.
Absolutely. The modal payment systems like Alipay and WeChat made tiny frictionless transactions totally normal. You could send someone 15 cents, maybe to tip an online writer or buy a small snack from a street vendor. It was seamless.
Which is a stark contrast to the US system where you still see minimum purchase amounts for credit cards or those 50-cent fees on small transactions.
Right. The U.S. system was really built around larger, less frequent credit card transactions. It created friction for those tiny payments. China's infrastructure, by enabling those micropayments, also accelerated the capture of that fine-grained transactional data. It fueled the data engine.
Now, this data advantage wasn't just happening organically. The Chinese government saw the potential. There was this specific event described as China's Sputnik moment.
Yeah, that was AlphaGo. When Google's AI beat the world's top Go player, it wasn't just seen as a tech demo in China. It was a wake-up call, a signal about national competitiveness, even national security, in the age of AI.
And similar to the U.S. moonshot goal after Sputnik, this triggered a massive national push for AI dominance. What did that look like?
It wasn't just a top-down decree from Beijing. It translated into really ambitious action at the local level. City mayors, often incentivized by promotion prospects, jumped in aggressively to turn their regions into AI development hubs.
How did they fund such a rapid build-out?
Massive state resources were mobilized. Local governments handed out significant subsidies for AI research and companies. And crucially, they directed these state-backed venture capital funds, these guiding funds, to pour money into specific strategic AI initiatives.
So a very coordinated, centrally planned push.
Absolutely. A well-funded, strategically aligned national effort to capture the lead in AI, viewing data and algorithms as critical national assets. Very different from the more market-driven, sometimes chaotic approach in the West.
That kind of intense focus on speed and strategic advantage in the data race inevitably trickles down, impacting individual workers. Which brings us to this really important economic idea, the Great Decoupling.
Right. The Great Decoupling. It fundamentally challenges that long-held belief that technological progress automatically benefits everyone, that a rising tide lifts all boats.
What exactly is it?
Well, for decades after World War II, in the U.S. especially, things moved together. Worker productivity went up, median wages went up, and employment levels generally went up too. They were coupled. That was kind of the post-war economic promise.
But something changed. That link broke.
It frayed dramatically. Starting about 30 years ago, coinciding with the rise of information and communication technologies, computers, software, the internet, worker productivity kept climbing. We got more efficient.
Okay, sounds good so far.
But median income for the average worker, it flattened out, stagnated. And employment levels in many sectors also stagnated or even declined. The value being created by the technology wasn't flowing through to the average worker's paycheck in the same way.
So the gains from productivity were going somewhere else. Maybe to capital owners, or maybe concentrated among very high-skilled workers.
That's the implication. The economic pie grew, but the slices weren't distributed like they used to be. And this is why the sources argued that AI's biggest disruption might not be in, say, international military competition, but right here at home in our labor markets and social systems.
Because if technology keeps improving, but most people aren't seeing the benefit, that creates massive instability.
Exactly. That social and economic turbulence is the core issue. It raises profound questions about fairness, opportunity, and the very structure of our society.
So, if AI is a key driver here, we need to understand what kinds of jobs it's actually good at replacing. It's not as simple as low skill versus high skill anymore, is it?
No, that traditional view is really misleading now. AI's impact is much more granular. It depends on the specific tasks within a job, not just the job title or the education level required.
Okay, so break that down. What tasks are AI really excelling at? Where are the winners in terms of automation?
AI has become incredibly good, often superhuman, at narrow, well-defined tasks that can be optimized using large amounts of data. Think pattern recognition, finding tumors in medical scans better than radiologists, or identifying complex financial patterns for trading, or sifting through millions of documents in legal discovery.
Tasks where the inputs and desired outcomes are clear and quantifiable.
Precisely. If you can feed it enough relevant data, AI can optimize performance in those narrow domains incredibly effectively.
Wait, But if it's already beating experts in complex fields like medicine and law on specific tasks, what jobs are actually safe? What can't AI do well?
Well, the sources point to three main areas where humans still hold a strong advantage, largely because these tasks involve things that are really hard to quantify or train an AI on using data alone.
Okay, what's the first one?
Jobs requiring genuine human interaction and empathy. Think about roles that involve complex negotiation, motivating a team, providing compassionate care, or making nuanced judgments in unpredictable social situations. AI struggles with genuine understanding, emotional intelligence, and reading subtle social cues.
Makes sense. What's the second category?
Physical dexterity. Even with all the advances in robotics, replicating the fine motor skills and adaptability of human hands and limbs in unstructured, unpredictable environments is still incredibly difficult.
So jobs like plumbers, electricians, surgeons, maybe even artists working with physical materials.
Exactly. Tasks that require manipulating objects in the real world with nuance and adaptability. Robots are great in controlled factory settings, but less so in messy, unpredictable ones.
And the third area feels relevant to what we do here.
It does. It's tasks requiring cross-domain thinking, creativity, and complex strategic planning where the inputs and outcomes aren't easily defined or based on past data.
So coming up with truly novel solutions, applying knowledge from one field to a completely different problem.
Right. That ability to synthesize information from disparate areas, to think abstractly, to improvise creatively, that remains a core human strength that AI finds very hard to replicate.
Okay, so even with those protected areas, there's going to be significant disruption. AI will displace workers, even if it makes the overall economy more productive. This points towards needing different kinds of solutions, maybe more cooperative ones.
Absolutely. The sources argue we need to shift our focus from purely competitive instincts towards finding cooperative ways to manage this turbulence. We need stronger social safety nets.
But isn't managing something like that incredibly complex for governments? They already handle so much bureaucracy.
It is complex, no doubt. But think about what modern governments already do. They inspect millions of buildings, accredit countless schools, manage intricate health insurance systems, process unemployment claims. The existing bureaucratic machinery is already vast and handles incredibly complex tasks.
So the idea of something like a social investment stipend, maybe a form of universal basic income or funding for retraining, isn't necessarily more complex than systems we already have.
The argument is that while it certainly adds another layer of organizational work, the potential human upside makes it worthwhile.
What's the upside specifically?
If the great decoupling leaves large numbers of people behind, you risk huge social unrest and division. A stipend or similar support could provide the stability needed for communities to adapt. It could free people up to pursue education, start local businesses, engage in care work or community building things valuable to society that AI can't do.
So it's less about a handout and more about an investment in social cohesion and resilience during a period of massive technological change.
Exactly. It's framing it as a necessary investment to navigate the transition, acknowledging that the old link between productivity and widespread prosperity is broken, and we need new mechanisms to ensure stability and opportunity.
That need for new mechanisms and considering the human cost really highlights the contrast with certain corporate cultures, especially in tech, that prioritize speed and disruption above almost everything else, the fake-it-till-you-make-it ethos.
And there's probably no more chilling example of where that ethos leads when applied recklessly than Theranos.
Right, because it wasn't just a buggy app or a failed website. They were dealing with people's health.
That's what makes it so unconscionable. Elizabeth Holmes and her team weren't just over-promising on software, they were cutting corners, and frankly, lying about a medical diagnostic product. Decisions based on their fake results could have had dire health consequences.
We know the broad strokes, but some of the specific details of the deception are just staggering. What was actually going on behind the scenes?
Well, their core technology, the Edison machine, it just didn't work reliably. It couldn't perform the range of tests they claimed, so they resorted to outright fraud.
No.
Whistleblowers revealed they were taking the tiny fingerstick blood samples, diluting them significantly, and then secretly running them on commercially available machines made by competitors, like Siemens.
Wow. So they were using standard lab equipment, but pretending the results came from their revolutionary mini lab.
Exactly. And worse, the next generation device, the one codenamed 4S that was supposed to fix all the problems, It completely failed internal validation. It was never actually deployed for patient testing, despite the claims. The whole thing was built on deception, propped up by hype and legal intimidation.
And Holmes's own management style seemed to reinforce this, didn't it? This intense focus on the company above all else.
Absolutely. There's that infamous quote when an employee raised concerns about burnout and unrealistic pressure. Her response was apparently something like, "I don't care. We can change people in and out. The company is all that matters."
That's incredibly callous.
It reveals a mindset where the mission, or rather the image of the company, completely eclipsed any concern for the individuals involved or even the basic truth. It created a pressure cooker where loyalty was prized above honesty.
And when things started to leak, they used heavy legal tactics.
Oh, yeah. Theranos cleverly operated in a bit of a regulatory loophole for a while by only using its devices within its own labs. But once whistleblowers started talking and journalists started digging, they brought out the big guns lawyers like David Boyce to threaten former employees, demand interviews, and try to control the flow of information through intimidation and NDAs.
It's a stark example. Now let's broaden out. The sources also compare other iconic tech leaders, like the classic rivalry, Steve Jobs versus Bill Gates. How did their styles differ?
It's a fascinating contrast. Gates was portrayed as the analytical powerhouse. Very practical, disciplined, methodical. He could be blunt, even rude in meetings, but it was usually directed at flawed logic or intellectual sloppiness, less personal.
And Jobs.
Jobs was the intuitive, romantic visionary, obsessed with design, perfection, the user experience. He managed through charisma, intensity, and incredibly high, often personally demanding expectations. His critiques could be legendarily cutting and feel very personal. One focused on processing power, the other on passion and aesthetics.
Then you have someone like Elon Musk, who seems to embody extreme risk-taking and a kind of relentless drive. That story about the rocket skirt.
Oh, that's a wild one. So the day before SpaceX launched, they find 2 small cracks in the engine skirt. Standard procedure, especially coming from a NASA background, would be stop everything, replace the entire engine stage, delay for weeks, huge cost.
But that's not what happened.
Not at all. Musk's team essentially asked, what if we just cut it off? They got giant shears, literally trimmed the cracked part of the skirt off, recalculated the minor thrust impact, decided it was acceptable, and launched the next day.
That's bold. Shocking, probably, to the traditional aerospace folks.
It absolutely was. It shows this incredible bias towards speed, towards finding the fastest path, even if it means bypassing established protocols and taking calculated but significant risks. Velocity over procedure.
But that same impatience and sort of disregard for norms created instant problems when he took over Twitter, right? His vision clashed hard with the business reality.
Big time. Musk wanted Twitter to be this haven for more raucous free speech, drastically loosening content moderation. But the predictable result, according to the sources, was the platform quickly becoming a cesspool of falsehoods and disinformation.
Which advertisers didn't appreciate.
Not remotely. Advertisers made up something like 90% of Twitter's revenue. They fled in droves. Within 6 months of the takeover, ad revenue had reportedly dropped by over half. It's a stark lesson in how a founder's vision, however strong, can crash against the rocks of business fundamentals, especially when it alienates your primary customers.
And finally, in this rogues gallery of sorts, we have Adam Neumann at WeWork. His approach was different. Again, it was about subverting the standard startup narrative for personal gain early on.
Yeah, the typical Silicon Valley story is everyone works like crazy for low pay and stock options, hoping for a big payday together at the IPO. Neumann flipped that script.
Oh.
He structured the company early on so he held the real equity, while many employees just had promises or complex options. Then he aggressively sold off large chunks of his own stake in private funding rounds, making himself incredibly rich long before any potential IPO. It was the opposite of the all-in-it-together ethos.
And he seemed to genuinely believe the hype, using very optimistic projections from banks like JP Morgan almost as proof of value.
He absolutely did. The sources say his team would treat these bullish, sometimes speculative bank forecasts as established fact to justify WeWork's sky-high valuation, even using it to pressure partners into taking WeWork stock instead of cash. He seemed caught in his own reality distortion field.
What happened when it all started to unravel, like with the failed SoftBank deal?
Apparently, he was completely blindsided when major backers, including Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, told him he needed to step down as CEO. The sources describe him basically panicking, running into Dimon's office protesting. He had built WeWork. It was his company. It showed a profound disconnect from the realities of corporate governance and the fact that investors ultimately call the shots.
This relentless drive for speed, control, and sometimes bending the rules isn't just in tech, of course. It's deeply embedded in modern finance, too, often creating this world of intense opacity. High-frequency trading, HFT, seems like the ultimate example.
Oh, absolutely. HFT is where the value of speed is measured in literal microseconds. It's an entire industry built on exploiting tiny time advantages. And it feeds on this deep-seated anxiety among traders, the fear of being just a fraction of a second slower than a competitor.
And the exchanges themselves figured out how to profit from this anxiety.
They did. Our sources describe how exchanges realized they could charge exorbitant fees for slightly faster data connections. They apparently increased the monthly cost for a slightly wider data pipe, offering an advantage of just 2 microseconds from $25,000 up to $40,000 a month.
$40,000 a month for 2 microseconds. That's incredible.
It's not about efficiency. It's about selling relief from the fear of being slower. It's pure rent extraction based on speed anxiety.
And the HFT firms themselves weren't just paying for speed. They were actively trying to manipulate the system's structure for tiny advantages, like jumping the queue.
Exactly. They pushed for and used specific order types that allowed them to add extra decimal places to their bids or offers. So if the standard price was, say, $30, they could place an order at 30.00001.
Just to get infinitesimally ahead of anyone offering $30 slab.
Precisely. It allowed them to effectively jump to the front of the line, ensuring their orders executed first, letting them capture tiny spreads or front-run larger incoming orders. It's a game of micromanipulation for marginal gains.
And the most concerning part is the lack of transparency around it all.
That's what the sources highlight. It's an industry where the biggest players, the ones making the most money, seem to actively want the least amount of clarity about how it actually works. That level of opacity in a core market mechanism is, or should be, deeply alarming.
That theme of complexity and opacity extends beyond just trading into how companies are bought and sold, particularly with leveraged buyouts, LBOs.
Right. LBOs became a dominant force, pioneered by firms like KKR and really honed by Blackstone. The basic mechanic is clever, but also carries significant risk.
How does it work again?
The private equity firm borrows a huge amount of money to buy a target company. But the key is they use the assets and future cash flows of the company they are buying as the collateral for the loan. The company essentially buys itself, but saddles itself with massive debt in the process.
And this led to what the sources call the colossal substitution of debt for equity.
Exactly. Especially in the years after the 2008 crisis and during periods of very low interest rates, debt became incredibly cheap. This allowed PE firms to borrow vast sums and buy companies at prices way above their stock market values. They fundamentally changed the financial structure of countless businesses, swapping out equity for debt.
Blackstone, led by Stephen Schwarzman, apparently had a specific strategy to navigate this high-priced, debt-fueled environment.
Yeah, Schwarzman emphasized partnerships. They tried to find a co-owner for their deals, often a major customer or supplier of the target company, someone who really understood the business from the inside. The idea was to gain an informational edge. Having a partner with deep operational knowledge could help them make smarter decisions and justify paying those high prices, giving them an advantage over firms staffed only by finance people. It was a way to de-risk the high valuations, at least somewhat.
But interestingly, when Blackstone looked at where their own profits were actually coming from, the strategy didn't always align with the narrative.
That's a fascinating paradox revealed in their internal analysis. The vast majority of their profits, something like 63%, actually came from what they called cyclical plays. Basically just timing the market well, buying low and selling high within economic cycles.
Not from fundamentally improving the businesses they bought.
Much less so. The investments that were actually aimed at those profound transformations, the stuff that's supposed to be the core value proposition of private equity, accounted for only about 14% of their invested capital, and believe it or not, collectively lost money.
Wow, so the profits were more from financial engineering and timing than operational genius.
The internal data suggests that was largely the case, yeah. Which raises questions about the broader economic value created.
This brings us back to ethics within finance. There's a great anecdote about Schwarzman and different sets of numbers.
It really crystallizes a cultural divide. Schwartzman tells a story about confronting a new team leader who had prepared 4 different financial projections for a potential deal.
4 different sets. Why?
Well, one set was for the banks to get the loan, another was for the tax authorities, a third was for potential equity partners, and the fourth set was what the team actually believed the numbers were.
That sounds problematic. Like a con job, as Schwartzman apparently called it.
He did. According to the story, he shut it down immediately, told the guy, "We're not in the con job business. At Blackstone, we have one set of numbers. Get out of here." It shows a commitment, at least internally, to financial consistency, which stands in contrast to some of the opacity we see elsewhere.
Still, despite that anecdote, this whole era clearly solidified finance's position as a primary engine for wealth creation among the elite.
Undeniably, the statistics are pretty clear. By 2005, around 18% of the top 0.1% of earners in the U.S. worked in finance. That was up significantly from about 11% back in 1979.
And their incomes were growing fastest.
Yeah, among that super elite group, the incomes of bankers and finance professionals were rising faster than almost any other profession. It just underscores how central finance became to accumulating wealth in this era of high speed, high leverage, and sometimes high opacity. #outro.
So, reflecting on all this, we've really charted a massive landscape today. We started with that global data war, seeing how the real advantage isn't just quantity, but the quality of data, especially data tied to the physical world, which is turbocharging AI in new ways.
Yeah, and we saw how that AI development is directly linked to the great decoupling, breaking that old promise that rising productivity automatically benefits most workers, forcing us to think about crucial social adaptations, like maybe a social investment stipend.
And then we dove into the corporate cultures driving this, whether it's tech founders pushing boundaries, sometimes into outright fraud like at Theranos, or the complex, high-speed, often opaque world of modern finance. There's this relentless pursuit of speed, control, and profit, often right up against ethical lines.
And that recurring theme, the common thread through it all, seems to be this increasing complexity and, crucially, opacity. Think about it. The inner workings of the AI algorithms shaping our information diet, the intricate leverage in LBOs restructuring our companies, the black box of high-frequency trading setting market prices.
It's alarming how little visibility there often is. The HFT example is striking the people making the most money, explicitly wanting the least clarity.
Exactly. Which leads us to that final, maybe unsettling thought to leave you with.
What happens when the most powerful systems shaping our economy, our jobs, even our access to knowledge, are governed by these incredibly complex, often opaque mechanisms that very few people truly understand?
When wealth generation, labor markets, and even the digital map of human knowledge depend on systems that are deliberately or inherently non-transparent, how do we ensure accountability? How do we make sure these incredibly powerful tools actually serve the broader public good and aren't just optimizing for the benefit of the few who control the code, the capital, or the data streams?
What is the societal cost when speed and complexity outpace our ability to comprehend and govern? That really is the question, isn't it?
It might be the defining question for this era.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.